Hello everybody, happy weekend, best day of the week. Doing some content today on vulnerability, what it is and why it's so important. So I think we're still coming through times where people feel that to be vulnerable is a weakness. And it's such a shame because it's just so powerful, and it builds connection, and it allows you to be closer to people and for people to really know who you are. And I think underneath everything, that's what people really want, right? So why do we fear vulnerability? So the first thing is, what is it to be vulnerable? Being truly vulnerable is taking stock of your emotions, taking stock of how you feel, and finding the voice to bring that out and to speak your truth to those around you. It's really good for putting in boundaries, because then you're letting people know how you're willing to be treated, what's not okay for you. So they kind of get to know you better. And this is a thing, when you're vulnerable and you're able to speak out what people often tend to hold in, that person gets to see the real you. And the reason people often hold back with vulnerability and think it's weak, and that's when I call it weak, I don't see it as weak at all. I think it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, but this is influx of what people are saying to me about what they feel with their fears of being vulnerable. It seems to be a consistent theme that people are using the word weak. It's not. It takes courage. And I think a lot of people have been brought up with the social conditioning and family conditioning that we learn to hold back what we're thinking and feeling, because we may have been met with judgment or criticism, or told off, or told we're bad, we're naughty as we grow up if we tend to be vulnerable. And I think underneath that, a lot of people are fearful of rejection and abandonment. So they have learned that if I speak my truth and say what my needs are and what's okay for me, or how that made me feel, ultimately I might experience loss, I might suffer loss, I might suffer grief, abandonment, rejection. So that's underneath it. So to be able to then still speak your truth, even if there's a fear of all of those negative things happening to you, I think that's really courageous, to be able to sort of feel the fear and say it anyway. And that's what vulnerability is. Yeah, I'm not saying to just go shooting anything out of your mouth that might be destructive or put you in a vulnerable situation. What I'm talking about is your emotions. So I've been a sucker for this. Half of my life I would hold in what I truly felt, and then wonder why the outcome of situations would always be the same and it would always be negative. What was happening was I wasn't truly sharing with people who I really am, what I'm really about, and what I really feel, probably for a myriad of those reasons that I've already mentioned. And now, because I've done so much self-work, which any of you can do, self-development work, get to know the real you. When you work through the blockages and the barriers and the fears, actually your fear of abandonment or rejection or not being acceptable or accepted actually diminishes, and you see the wood for the trees. Because if you can be your true self and bring that to the people that you're closest to, if they're rejecting you, maybe they're not worthy of being in your life, or worthy of having your focus on them, or worthy of recognizing how great you are. How about that? Rather than I'm being rejected and abandoned. That takes a lot of work, and it can be painful work, it can be scary, and it will mean that you develop a relationship more with yourself than you ever have before. And that can be scary, because then we can start to go, oh, who am I? I thought I was X, Y, and Z because that's what I've always lived. And now I'm discovering, when I think about how I truly feel about a situation, that's not what I think at all, which means I might be a slightly different person to who I thought. But you know what? That's okay. That takes courage. So when you think about vulnerability, what you're doing is you're actually embracing connection. So those around you, you're able to vibe with more. They know who you are. They see who you are. That's really, really scary sometimes. But that way, they can be closer to you. That way they can be appropriate around you in a way that isn't triggering you, or hurting you, or making you feel these certain things. Because if you hold all these vulnerabilities in, how can you expect other people to protect you from those vulnerabilities? Obviously we have to protect ourselves, but when we're around people, we need to feel emotionally safe. If they don't know what floats our boat and what doesn't, how can we expect them to be able to meet our needs to keep us emotionally safe? They might think we're a completely different person to who we really are. Might think we're so different. And usually that comes down to you holding back. Every time you notice that something goes through your mind, but you think better of it, I'm not going to say that, I won't. I'll appease the situation, I'll keep the peace, I won't rock the boat. Just notice why you're doing that. Why am I doing that if that thought or feeling is important to me? I'm putting somebody else first, but it just creates more and more separation between two people. So you could be in the same room for the rest of your life, but there could be tremendous distance. So vulnerability is being able to say those things that is called the shadow work, that we might feel shameful about or guilty about or embarrassed about. All these things. Why should we feel any of those things? If there are emotions, they're a part of us. Share. Allow your decision of who needs to be around you and who's not good for you to come about after you share your vulnerability. See how that person reacts. You might be pleasantly surprised. You might not be surprised in a good way either. But either or, it's all about you being your true authentic self. And if people around you can't vibe with that because they've seen the masks you've worn and they've vibed with the masks, which the isn't the real you, it will get really uncomfortable because you'll feel like those people can't hear you. They don't understand you. Of course they don't, because it's based on something that isn't completely real, because that fear of vulnerability is creating all these masks that you're not. So if people have to drop away when you get vulnerable, don't worry about that. It's making space for other authentic people who can do a degree of vulnerability to slip into that space with you. Out with the old, in with the new, maybe. But vulnerability is the biggest gift you can give yourself. And that's the most important thing.